pleasure to be here. Dr. Howard drilled down into one of the main components of the future of work, and that is work that's going to be non-standard in a variety of different ways and with a lot more flexibility. I'm going to pull back and take a 30,000-foot view of the future of work and relate it to occupational safety and health. I want to thank my collaborators who've been working with me on this effort. So why is there such an interest in the future of work? You see it everywhere now. It's the topic du jour of almost every organization. Well, partly it's because of the growth of the exponential growth, the rapid growth of technology, and the concern that technology will impact jobs to the point of displacing people, putting people out of work. But there are other factors too. The rapidly changing nature of work, the workforce and the workplace, due to not only technology, but a lot of other factors, are all making people anxious about what work will look like in the future. And the critical thing is we don't have to take it. We can shape it. And so that is essentially a message that comes through in a lot of future work. Just to clarify or to amplify a few things, this is depicts the exponential growth of technology. You're familiar with graphs like this. Increasingly, we're seeing more rapid development of various stages of technological advancement. And Dr. Howard talked about the four eras, if you will, of industrial revolution. We are, as he noted, in the fourth, and it came out of various German considerations. One thing to think about, and here the German authors say this will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another, unlike anything mankind has experienced. There's a good bit of rhetoric and hyperbole in the literature on the future of work, and to distinguish between that and sort of anticipatory, conscientious anticipation is a difficult task sometimes. Hines and Bishop out of the University of Houston have been doing a lot of work in studying futures, and they reiterate what I said, that it's not predetermined and that the future outcomes can be influenced. So that's one of the reasons NIOSH and other organizations are putting some emphasis on this. We can make a difference if we figure out what we want to do. And it can move us from being reactive. And historically, occupational safety and health has been generally a reactive discipline. That's not a slight. That's just the normal way things work. But we can be more proactive in terms of the design of job arrangements, in terms of the type of work that can be performed with new technologies, and particularly linking them to the challenges for occupational safety and health and well-being. Jim Dater was an early futurist, and I love this quote because it talks about the reiteration of your thinking. Preferred futures can and should be envisioned, invented, implemented, continuously evaluated, revised, and re-envisioned. There is not one future. It's a constant process of thinking that one needs to go through. Now, it's critical when we talk about the future to realize that it's going to be a mosaic of hazards. People are still going to be exposed in 20 or 30 years probably to asbestos, to silica, to the hazards of manual material handling, to noise. We're not going to be able to get rid of everything because it's the future. But we're also going to have new high-tech things coming along. And so we're going to have a mosaic. We're going to have things working in parallel. So we're going to have to be able to deal with the old things, old jobs, old hazards in new settings, old hazards in traditional settings, and then all kinds of new hazards. And then finally, overarching all this is the increasing impact of climate, and climate on work, and climate as an occupational hazard. You all know this. I won't belabor it. The ways the world of work is changing. Work itself is changing. It's a mosaic, as I said. There's a big movement, though, from physical work, which will still exist in the mosaic, to more mental work. There will be more service work. Intensification of work can be greater. A lot more work that people have to do, working longer hours, many more days, and mostly many jobs over a working lifetime. The big change also in the workforce, the demographics, older workers, more immigrants, more women. We're dealing with the fact that there's less organized labor. And one of the things that we don't talk about, but which costs a great amount in terms of presenteeism, is the burden that an aging workforce will bring with chronic disease as they go to work. That can be not an issue, or it can be a larger issue. And there are the interactions between chronic disease and the susceptibility of workers to workplace hazards has not been studied nearly enough. And then finally, workplaces are changing. There's more small businesses, more telecommuting, more non-standard arrangements, such as Dr. Howard pointed out, and clearly a decrease in social protection. So, however you want to think about the future, it's clear that this isn't part of it. The one person working for one company for their whole life is a thing of the past. And we're clearly not going to see that. What we are going to see, however you slice it, is people doing many different jobs in their working life. And while occupational safety and health historically is focused on this box right here, we now have to focus on this whole picture. So not only on classic occupational hazards, things that are directly related to an occupational exposure at a workplace, but also work-related hazards, hazards that are part of the web of causation that not necessarily cause a health effect, but maybe exacerbate one or contribute in some way. And then within this too, there's also a whole range of issues of the security of having this job, being in it, being anxious about whether you're going to lose it, being underemployed, working at less of your capabilities or for less money. Underemployment has many of the same kind of health effects as unemployment. And so we not only have to be worried about this box and this side, but then we need to think of the whole working lifetime of people, because in the future we're going to increasingly see people changing jobs. And so occupational safety and health needs to focus not only on this, but on the spaces between jobs, on thinking about the impact of unemployment, on thinking about the anxieties and stresses of coming in, going out of a job, coming into a new job, the potential for lack of training for some kinds of hazards in a new job that people might not have. And so it's thinking of this whole working life continuum, and even into retirement. People come in and out of retirement, so you have a blended situation. So this, the job of the future is, the job for life is no longer what we're going to see. We're going to see more people in and out of jobs. There's also growing concern for the fact that these characteristics, the technologies and the other determinants there, will displace people from their work and diminish labor as a driver of economic growth and put more emphasis on capital. What that means is people will buy more AI-related machines and robotics instead of workers. But a lot of this will create new kinds of hazards. These are some of the estimates in the literature of the size of displacement that can occur. The big number out there is 47% of U.S. jobs susceptible to automation, and it goes down to maybe a better number, closer to 9% by the OECD, by Arntz and colleagues. The thing about the Fry and Osborne assessment is that they looked at occupations, and when you really think about it and look at the literature, it may be better to focus on tasks rather than specific occupations. not all occupations can be completely computerized, but various tasks within those occupations can, and that is likely that what we need to focus on. And then there is an issue of when is all this going to happen? And the literature is somewhat divided. Some say it will happen fairly rapidly. Others think that it will be a gradual kind of change. And you can go back and look at the whole history of the impact of technology on work. Clearly, you can go back to the Luddites and Ned Ludd, possibly a fictional character to represent a movement. But Nobel laureates, Keynes and Leontief, all the way up to the classic paper by Bjorn-Jolfsen and McAfee, which really set the stage for thinking about the role of technology in relation to work. And clearly, we're seeing it happening now, and the extent at which it increases will probably increase in the next decade. So the current technological trends may erode middle-class jobs, and that's what we're seeing, leading to a job polarization. So you have high-paying jobs, you have all the middle-class jobs are being either taken over by automation or pushed to a lower-paying wage. And so you have a big mass of people working for a lot less money, and then a lot of people, a smaller mass working for a lot of money, and the people in the middle are pretty well shortchanged. McKinsey believes that 400 million people globally will be displaced in the next decade. That's a fair amount. Now, it's clear that with technology, historically, technology has generally created more jobs than that are lost. But it isn't necessarily for the same people who lose their jobs. So some people may get squashed in this kind of transition because they're not going to necessarily be the ones who will get the new jobs, because there's a mismatch between the technological or job requirements and the skills and capabilities of people. Consequently, there's a really need, well, there's a controversy over how big and the nature of that skill gap in the literature. But in any event, most people believe there's a need for proactive worker training and retraining in hard and soft skills, and ultimately a lifelong learning. That we all have to be part of a lifelong learning community, every worker. And what does that mean, and how do you make that? This just shows you again the sort of extent of susceptibility of jobs, U.S. jobs, to computerization. This is the work of Fry and Osborne. You can see most sectors are affected. Construction, mining are susceptible to automated processes and mechanical, electrical influences. So this is not just, we're just not talking about office workers here, though predominantly people who work in front of computers will be involved. Another factor is that too often the literature talks about the disruptive techniques of technology, but technology is also enabling. And if we can figure out how to enable people with the technology who might, to do the things that people do best, that may alleviate some of the disruption. If you take the arguments out to their logical extreme, there is a whole bit of literature that talks about the end of work. Are we going to get to a point where we're going to not have enough work for all the people who need to work? And I've heard some labor leaders say, well, how's a robot going to buy a car or go to a restaurant? And so it's a pretty complex issue, but clearly the concept of no work needs to be thought about by the safety and health community, because we need to be players in that discussion. So now I'm going to talk to you about a couple of approaches that have been used. This is the NIOSH approach to the future of work. We've started an initiative. Dr. Howard has had great foresight in this regard and has been dealing with future issues for over a decade, and clearly promoted that we launch this initiative. And as he says at the end here, there is no launch date for the future. It starts now. In any event, it's going to build on the workplace, and workforce approach. You can check it out at the website. And what we hope to do is focus research in each of those areas, and particularly research on the non-standard work conditions that he was talking about. We have another study that's going on that I'm leading on a review of the scientific literature for a 20-year period to identify what in the literature are scenarios of the future of work. And so what have people thought, with all their powers and creativity and imagination, are scenarios, and have they linked any potential hazards to those scenarios? And if they haven't, then maybe we can assess, as occupational safety and health people, we can take those scenarios and identify hazards. So we got two pathways here of looking at scenarios, and the whole idea of scenario building and scenario studying is a core approach in the future literature. And so we're going to look through the scientific literature, both the peer-reviewed literature and the gray literature, and try to disentangle from the literature some of these various scenarios. And this is an example of what we are doing. We've looked at 1,500 articles, and we're down to 23. This is the peer-reviewed literature. Then the gray literature is even larger, because every organization in the world seems to have some position or study on the future. So we're going to be looking at them as well. And I'm not going to show you the data, but except for one finding here that's a bit interesting. This is the anticipated changes to job risks and hazards by category of hazard. And the real action here is there's some in the physical that it's likely that changes will occur. The blue means none. The orange means some change in existing. The yellow is creation of a new hazard, and the gray is exacerbation of existing. So these last two columns are the ones that are particularly critical. And so you see some action in terms of physical hazards, not much showing in chemical or biologic hazards, and a great amount in psychosocial hazards. We see in the literature, and as you probably well know, the concern about the stress of the interaction with new technologies and with job insecurity is tremendous. And that's what we're seeing in the literature. What we don't see, which I believe, and we've written a number of papers on this, in the biologic area, the impact of biologic production processes that will increase in the future through synthetic biological approaches, where biologic platforms will replace oil and petrochemical platforms in producing an awful lot of goods. We think is going to be a big area, and the potential to make almost quasi-new types of life by rearranging genes, types of life that never have existed. I think that's going to be critical, but we don't see it in the literature at this point. And so what we're going to do is an in-depth analysis of the scenarios that we discover, try to group them in thematic groupings, and then see if there's any kind of preliminary recommendations that we can make for occupational safety and health, either in terms of research or intervention. Here's another approach. It's the ICOH approach to the future of work. The ICOH Future of Decent Work group has been in existence for about a year and a half. We have I'm chair of that we have a subgroup on migrant worker health, and essentially what we're going to do is focus on developing a white paper following workforce and workplace categorizations, and then see if we can come up with practical advice for occupational safety and health specialists and others, a basis for needed research, and specification of social or other policies that will promote the decent work in the future and the protection of workers in the future. And here it is again, shown in 3 circles. Finally, how am I doing on time? Okay, finally, what I think is critical is the need to have a paradigm shift in occupational safety and health professions to address the problems that are occurring now than it will occur in the future. We need a broader view of burden, and we need to be thinking broader horizontally and vertically. And this is a picture of a model that we've been working on where traditional occupational safety and health we're familiar with. But the problems that we're starting to see, as were discussed here and Dr. Howard indicated, go beyond traditional occupational safety and health. We've started to capture it with total worker health, but we really need to expand horizontally to look at the impact of personal risk factors and work. We did a paper in 2012 where we identified 32 models of the interaction of 9 personal risk factors and occupational hazards. And then we drilled down and did one on work and obesity, and another one more recently on work and opioids and benzodiazepines. And then clearly from the macro level, we have to look at the social and economic risk factors. And when I talk about this, I'm not so naive to think that we're not on a slippery slope to blaming the worker when we bring these things in. So that clearly has to be at the front of our attention. But we need this broader view. And then we need a vertically integrated view, if you will. We need to think in terms of the working life continuum that I showed you. And then how are we going to capture all this? We need some sort of construct that is more overarching, and possibly the construct of worker well-being will be the construct. And NIOSH has been trying to operationalize that and is working on a survey instrument that might be helpful in that regard. And then finally, just to reiterate what I said earlier about the mosaic of work that we're going to see in the future, we're going to see old and new hazards, and we're going to see traditional jobs and new jobs, and we're going to see various permutations of old hazards in old locations, old jobs and old hazards and new jobs, and so forth. And we're going to have to figure out what actions we want to take in each of those cells. And then lastly, I think it's critical that we do not get hung up on only thinking of technology as the determinant of the future of work. It clearly is critical, but historically technology has always been mediated through social processes. And there are a lot of other factors that clearly are going to affect the future of work: demographics, climate, economic and political conditions, urbanization, and globalization. And we need to start, when we talk about the future of work, even from an occupational safety and health perspective, we need to think about all of these things and not just technology or not just exposure to one hazard. We need a more holistic, comprehensive approach because that's what the future of work is going to demand if we're going to be real helpers of people in that time. So thank you.